In the chaos of a broken battlefield, one small vehicle kept finding a way through. While heavier armor stalled in mud and rubble, the Humber scout car slipped past the wreckage with the speed and nerve of a machine that understood time was the real enemy. Its crews trusted it because it carried the orders, maps and officers that kept entire attacks moving. And despite its size, it behaved with the sheer stubbornness of something twice its weight and 3 times its attitude. When the front wavered, it was often this little scout that kept the whole show on track. The British Army entered the early years of the war with a simple problem. It could move men, it could move armour, but it struggled to move information. Orders travelled too slowly across broken ground, liaison officers were too exposed on motorcycles, and armoured cars were too big to manoeuvre in the cramped lanes of Europe. What the army needed was something smaller, quicker, and far easier to hide, yet still strong enough to shrug off small arms fire when the fighting closed in. The strategic gap widened sharply after the 1940 retreat from France, when commanders realized that coordination between advancing units failed not because of poor planning, but because messages could not keep pace with rapidly shifting front lines. Motorcycles were vulnerable, radio sets were limited in range, and larger armoured cars were too slow to cross wrecked infrastructure in time. A new category of machine was required, one with the agility of a motorcycle, the protection of light armour, and the internal space to carry maps, radios, and the officers responsible for knitting an army's movements together. Designers were told to prioritise 3 core needs: minimal size, dependable speed, and simple armour. A small silhouette mattered more than heavy plating because a scout vehicle had to pass through ruined towns, cut hedgerows, and improvised tracks where anything larger became a target. The chosen layout placed the engine low and forward to stabilize the hull, giving the crew enough room for radios and secure message satchels while keeping the weight balanced for sudden turns. To maintain pace over rough surfaces, the suspension was tuned for rapid compression, allowing the wheels to react quickly without throwing the crew against the roof with every impact. Reliability was equally important. Scout crews relied on predictable behavior from their vehicle because their missions demanded speed under pressure. The Humber's driveline was designed with easily serviced components and wide tolerances to cope with dust, grit, and improvised repairs in the field. Its steering geometry gave a surprisingly tight turning radius, letting drivers weave around obstacles that defeated heavier armour. And in keeping with British engineering tradition, the official requirement politely asked the factory to create a vehicle of modest dimensions capable of enthusiasm in adverse conditions, which is bureaucratic code for make it work even when everything else refuses. All these needs pointed toward a lightweight armoured machine with the manners of a nimble runabout, yet the backbone of a battlefield messenger. That pressure shaped the initial concept of what would become the Humber Scout Car. The early vision for the Humber Scout Car came from a blend of battlefield necessity and industrial experience. British designers knew they were not building a fighting vehicle, they were building a connector, a runner between units, a courier for vital information, and a mobile platform for reconnaissance officers who needed protection without losing mobility. The concept began as a set of practical questions. How small could an armoured hull be while still carrying 2 men, a radio, and enough fuel for long liaison missions? How quickly could such a machine manoeuvre through shell-torn villages or narrow field tracks without losing control? And how would it stay light while still giving crews confidence under fire? Humber engineers proposed a compact, forward-set engine layout that refined weight distribution and created a tidy cabin free from the obstructions found in older armoured cars. This cabin needed to house a number 19 wireless set, the standard British radio, which demanded space not only for the equipment, but also for batteries, aerials, and the operator's reach. Designers prioritized clarity of vision, wide armoured shutters, glass blocks, and a clear driver's line of sight were far more important than heavy armour thickness, which would have slowed the vehicle to a crawl. The philosophy was simple. If the driver could see trouble early, he could avoid it entirely. Another part of the vision was interoperability across the Army's vehicle fleet. To simplify repairs, Humber looked to existing components, engines, drivetrains and electrical systems already proven in cars and light trucks. This ensured a steady supply of spare parts and reduced the strain on workshops already overwhelmed by wartime demands. It also meant crews could learn the vehicle's behaviour quickly, giving them confidence during high-speed runs under fire. The use of a commercial-style 4x2 drivetrain kept the hull compact and easy to service, while also eliminating the extra weight and complexity of four-wheel drive. A notable debate centred on protection. Some argued for heavier armour to resist anti-tank rifles, but engineers reminded planners that weight was the enemy of mobility. The hull was kept thin enough to retain speed, yet angled to deflect incoming rounds. The resulting layout produced a low-slung machine with a sharp nose, sloped plates, and clean lines that made it hard to hit at a distance. It was, in essence, the logical outcome of British reconnaissance doctrine: see first, move fast, and never present an easy target. And in a rare moment of wartime optimism, one engineer claimed the new scout car would be almost pleasant to drive, proving that even in total war, someone in a design office was still dreaming big. The vision was set: build a light, agile armoured messenger that could keep the army connected across a collapsing battlefield. Humber's factories shifted into high gear as soon as the scout car design received approval. Wartime production demanded speed, uniformity, and the ability to work under constant pressure from shifting supply chains. Hull plates arrived as pre-cut rolled armour, thin enough to stay light yet strong enough to resist small arms fire, and were welded into the vehicle's distinctive wedge shape with wide seams to accommodate rapid assembly. This angular layout wasn't aesthetic. It improved ballistic performance without resorting to extra thickness, saving precious steel for heavier vehicles. Inside the workshops, the chassis was built on jigs adapted from Humber's civilian lines, allowing car-derived components to slot into place with minimal modification. The 4x2 driveline, chosen for its simplicity, meant fewer machining steps and less time spent aligning heavy gear sets. The front suspension used coil springs that provided predictable behaviour over rough ground, while the rear relied on leaf springs capable of absorbing sudden impacts without cracking under battlefield loads. These decisions kept production fast and maintenance straightforward for the units that would eventually rely on them. One of the most demanding tasks involved integrating the number 19 wireless set. It required shock mounting to protect from vibration, careful routing of wiring looms, and a dedicated cooling gap inside the hull. The aerial base had to be fitted precisely, angled to avoid interference with the hatch layout. Production teams developed a repeatable pattern: fit the set, lay the cables, test the signal strength, then move the hull along the line. This attention to internal layout was essential. A poorly installed radio could cost valuable seconds in the field when operators needed clarity during movement. Fuel systems were assembled with wide filters to cope with low-grade wartime petrol, and the engine bay was designed with open access points so crews could swap plugs, adjust timing, or drain fluids at roadside without dismantling half the hull. Nothing on the vehicle was built for luxury. Everything was built for survivability through routine servicing. And true to British manufacturing habits of the era, the build was a mixture of solid engineering, and a few compromises that required mechanics to show a degree of patience bordering on sainthood. Quality checks involved short bench runs for the engine, brake tests along the factory lanes, and alignment checks to ensure the vehicle tracked straight at speed. Once these boxes were ticked, the Humber Scout car rolled out ready for field issue, proof that a light armoured vehicle could be produced quickly without sacrificing the essentials needed for frontline use. Field testing of the Humber Scout car was conducted with a single aim: confirm that its agility and communication role outweighed its light armour and modest power. Trials pushed the machine across uneven ground, tight village roads, tank ruts, and improvised tracks that would quickly expose any weakness in steering, suspension, or traction. The narrow hull proved its worth immediately, slipping through gaps that stalled heavier four-wheel drive reconnaissance cars, while the sloped plates helped deflect small arms fire during live fire assessments. Drivers found they could change direction quickly without unsettling the balance, a key requirement for evasive manoeuvres during liaison duties. The six-cylinder Humber engine was tested for how well it held speed while carrying a radio operator, equipment, and full fuel load. Although not built for raw acceleration, it demonstrated a steady, predictable pull that mattered more in practical terms than high top speed. The gearing allowed smooth movement at low engine speeds, especially valuable when creeping through narrow streets or advancing to observation points where silence was essential. Radio trials compared reception quality while the vehicle was stationary, moving at pace, and idling beside other engines, a demanding test for the number. 19 set. Results showed that the interior mounting and cable routing preserved signal clarity even over rough surfaces, proving the installation design had been worthwhile. One of the most revealing phases tested the Scout car's stability over broken landscapes. The coil and leaf suspension combination handled abrupt shifts without throwing the occupants across the cabin, and the chassis maintained directional control even when a wheel dropped into craters formed by earlier shell impacts. The compact wheelbase allowed the vehicle to pivot cleanly around debris or natural obstacles, while the lowered centre of gravity reduced rollover risk when taking corners at speed on loose ground. These characteristics mattered because the Scout car rarely operated far behind the front line. Its job placed it exactly where roads were damaged, unstable, or barely existing at all. Testing also explored how quickly crews could enter and exit under threat. The dual hatches and uncluttered interior allowed fast mounting and dismounting, reflecting the practical acceptance that reconnaissance units needed rapid movement on foot as often as they needed protection inside. And in true British fashion, the reports noted that the driver's position offered good visibility, weather permitting, which is a polite way of admitting the vehicle was perfectly functional provided it wasn't raining sideways. Despite its limitations, the trial results confirmed a simple truth. When information had to move fast under fire, the Humber Scout car could get it there. The true test of the Humber Scout car came when it reached active units during the later stages of the war. Its value was quickly recognized not in spectacular battlefield moments, but in the smaller, relentless tasks that kept operations coherent, delivering reports, guiding armor, linking infantry companies, and providing mobile observation for officers who needed eyes on the ground. It excelled in ruined towns where tight angles and collapsed streets crippled larger vehicles. Its short wheelbase allowed it to turn in spaces barely wider than its own tracks, letting it weave between rubble and keep contact between forward elements that would otherwise lose track of each other. In practice, the Scout car's breakthrough was its ability to remain mobile even when battle conditions were at their worst. Units deployed it for rapid linking between spearheads, using its agility to carry maps and revised orders forward when radio signals were disrupted by terrain or enemy interference. The number 19 set worked reliably inside the hull, allowing liaison officers to pass updates while still on the move. This combination of mobility and communication filled a critical gap between infantry, armour and artillery, an organisational weakness exposed repeatedly in earlier campaigns. What it lacked in armament, it made up for in the speed with which staff work could be carried out directly on the battlefield. However, limitations became clear as the fighting intensified. The armour, while angled effectively, was thin enough that sustained fire or heavy-caliber weapons posed a serious threat. Its 4x2 drivetrain restricted its performance in deep mud or snow, particularly compared with fully driven reconnaissance vehicles. Crews learned to choose their routes carefully, avoiding ground that might bog them down during urgent movements. Maintenance notes revealed recurring issues with clutch wear under constant stop-start driving, and the engine bay, though accessible, could overheat if ventilation panels clogged with debris. These were not catastrophic flaws, but they demanded disciplined driving and keen attention from crew and mechanics alike. Despite these constraints, the Scout car succeeded because it met the operational need it was designed for, keeping information moving across unstable front lines. It proved most effective in the hands of experienced drivers who understood exactly how to exploit its compact frame, smooth steering, and low profile to stay out of direct fire while completing missions that could not wait. And, as one testing summary dryly noted, its greatest strength was that it encouraged sensible use, which is a diplomatic British way of saying the machine behaved impeccably right up to the point someone tried to treat it like a tank. In the end, it wasn't a breakthrough of power. It was a breakthrough of practicality, proving that battlefield communication could be protected, mobile, and quick all at once. The Humber Scout car created consequences far beyond its modest size. Its widespread use in liaison roles subtly reshaped how British and Commonwealth forces coordinated movements across complex fronts. By enabling officers to travel under armour rather than exposed on motorcycles, it tightened the connection between units, reducing delays that had previously slowed advances or allowed gaps to form between infantry and armour. This improvement in battlefield communication didn't attract headlines, but its effects were measurable. Faster regrouping after engagements, better synchronization of supporting fire, and fewer units becoming isolated during rapid operations. As production expanded, the Scout car affected logistics in ways that were not originally anticipated. Because it used commercial components, it reduced the strain on military supply chains. Spare parts for its Humber engine and running gear could be sourced from civilian stock or adapted quickly in field workshops. This freed up specialized armor spares for heavier vehicles that needed them more urgently. The knock-on effect was a smoother flow of maintenance materials across frontline depots, helping larger formations maintain operational tempo during sustained fighting. Quiet efficiencies like this often mattered more than any single dramatic battlefield success. Its influence extended overseas in the post-war years, especially in regions where Dutch and Commonwealth forces operated during periods of political transition and unrest. Lightweight armoured vehicles were essential for patrolling dispersed communities and maintaining secure lines of communication across varied terrain. The Humber's compact design made it suitable for these duties, allowing it to navigate towns, plantations, and narrow rural tracts where heavier vehicles struggled. Its presence in these theatres was a reminder that wartime designs, once optimized for European battlefields, could be repurposed to support administrative and stabilization roles in the years that followed. A less obvious consequence emerged from how the vehicle shaped training and doctrine. Reconnaissance units grew accustomed to planning routes based on the strengths of the Humber: tight turning radius, quick acceleration from low speeds, and the ability to slip through confined spaces. These habits influenced the expectations of post-war scout cars and light armoured vehicles, encouraging future designs to prioritize agility over sheer protection. And like many British machines of the period, it quietly forced planners to admit that clever engineering could occasionally solve problems they had been throwing manpower at for years. The Scout car's hidden legacy lay in this combination of logistical efficiency, doctrinal adjustment, and post-war adaptability, consequences that emerged gradually but shaped how armies used light armoured vehicles long after the war had ended. By the end of the war, the Humber Scout car had earned a reputation not for glamour, but for consistency, the kind of machine that quietly did its job and shaped expectations for the vehicles that followed. Its post-war career reflected this practicality. Armies that required reliable, compact reconnaissance and liaison vehicles adopted it readily, especially in regions where the terrain punished anything too heavy or too complicated. Its ability to operate in tight urban spaces and weave through rural tracks made it valuable in territories undergoing political change and reconstruction. In many Commonwealth and former colonial theatres, the Scout car transitioned from a wartime messenger to a stabilization tool. Patrols used it to visit dispersed outposts, support local administrations, and maintain presence without escalating tension by deploying heavier armour. Its engine, derived from civilian practice, tolerated local fuel and workshop conditions far better than more complex post-war models. These qualities made it a natural fit for forces working across Southeast Asia and other regions, where road conditions varied dramatically and maintenance resources were stretched thin. Here, the machine's wartime design priorities, agility, simplicity, and serviceability, became peacetime advantages. The Humber also left a technical legacy inside the British Army's design philosophy. Future Scout vehicles were expected to match or exceed its manoeuvrability, maintain straightforward mechanical systems, and offer good visibility for rapid decision-making at ground level. The idea that a reconnaissance machine should be compact enough to hide, fast enough to reposition, and light enough to operate where larger armoured cars struggled became embedded in post-war doctrine. Engineers studying its service reports noted the value of angled armour for deflection, uncluttered interiors for communication equipment, and accessible engine bays that crews could service during mobile operations. Equally important was how the Scout car influenced training practices. Drivers learned the importance of reading terrain, choosing lines that exploited the Humber's strengths while avoiding its limits. Radio operators benefited from layouts that gave them enough room to work effectively inside a moving vehicle, a design feature later incorporated into modern reconnaissance platforms. Its low profile and steady behavior at moderate speeds made it an excellent reference point for the next generation of armored liaison vehicles, many of which carried its DNA in the balance between protection, speed, and communication capability. And, true to British understatement, official evaluations noted that its utility exceeded its appearance, which is a tactful way of admitting that a vehicle doesn't need to turn heads to prove its worth. The Humber Scout car's legacy was never about dramatic battlefield heroics. It was about shaping the quieter, essential workings of post-war mobility, communication, and reconnaissance doctrine. The Humber Scout car's story is, at its core, a study in how small, unassuming machines can influence the rhythm of a war. It never promised shock action or armoured breakthroughs. Its purpose was movement, connection, and the steady flow of information across places where chaos made that task anything but simple. By combining a compact hull with dependable road manners and space for communication gear, it gave commanders a tool that could keep contact alive when advancing fronts splintered into unpredictable fragments. This function may seem modest beside the heavy armour of the era, yet without it, many operations would have struggled to stay coherent under pressure. What sets the Scout car apart in hindsight is how its design principles have persisted across decades of military development. The priorities it embodied, agility, low profile, serviceability, and effective communication capability, remain essential for modern reconnaissance vehicles. Designers continue to value light platforms that can slip through complex terrain, deliver personnel safely, and maintain situational awareness without relying solely on brute force. Its angled armour, uncluttered interior, and readily accessible mechanical layout demonstrated that smart engineering choices could achieve far more than simply adding weight or firepower. The vehicle's continued presence in post-war operations across distant regions underscores another lesson. Machines built for the battlefield frequently find renewed purpose when the fighting ends. The same qualities that let the Humber weave through shattered towns in Europe made it equally suitable for navigating the narrow roads and shifting environments of post-war Southeast Asia. This adaptability is a reminder that military technology, when thoughtfully designed, often serves longer and more broadly than originally intended. And in typical British fashion, the Scout car proved that a straightforward solution, sensibly engineered and sensibly used, can outlast more ambitious designs that never quite lived up to their promises. As a product of necessity, shaped by experience and refined through service, it stands as an example of how a humble vehicle can leave a lasting mark on doctrine, engineering, and the quiet mechanics of maintaining order in the most unpredictable circumstances.